The door slid open with a quiet hiss, and Ethan stepped inside his new living quarters. It was more spacious than he expected. Smooth metallic walls, a reinforced window showing the endless darkness of space, and a pair of sleeping pods on opposite sides. The station had the usual artificial gravity hum, making the place feel stable despite floating in the vast void. Ethan set his duffel bag down, stretching his shoulders. After months of traveling, he was finally here. Pirellian Station Alpha 9, a neutral space station where humans and aliens coexisted for trade and diplomacy. It wasn't home, but it was better than the crank ships he had been stuck on. But there was one problem. He had a roommate, and not just any roommate. The door on the opposite side of the room slid open, and a tall, violet-skinned alien woman stepped in. Her piercing silver eyes locked onto him, her expression unreadable. She had the sharp, refined features of a Pirellian, her smooth skin almost metallic under the artificial lights. A long, deep blue cloak draped over her shoulders, covering most of her form. This was Zale, an officer from the Pirellian Empire. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "So, I guess we're roommates." Zale blinked, then tilted her head slightly. "You are the human assigned to this unit." Ethan smirked. "Unless there's another one hiding under the bed." Zale didn't seem amused. She took a slow, deliberate step forward, her gaze flickering over his clothes. Humans were considered rough, unpredictable, and too creative for their own good. Pirellians valued order, strict regulations, and discipline. Ethan could already tell this wasn't going to be an easy living situation. "I'd assume you will follow the rules of this station," Zale said, her voice smooth but firm. Ethan shrugged. Yeah. No fights, no mess, no unauthorized equipment, no primitive human behavior. I read the guide." Zale's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't argue. Instead, she walked past him and set her belongings in a perfectly organized stack on her side of the room. Ethan sighed. Great, a rule follower. He decided to ignore her and focused on unpacking his gear. He placed his toolkit, a few personal items, and his modified survival gear on the table. Among them were his custom-built exogloves, a small portable energy shield, and a compact multi-tool, things he had designed himself from spare parts. Zale, who had been busy adjusting a control panel, suddenly turned. Her eyes locked onto the items on the table. Her entire posture changed. She stiffened, her shoulders tensing as she took a sharp breath. Her silver eyes widened, and for the first time, her calm, controlled expression cracked with shock. Ethan noticed. Something wrong. Zale took a step forward, staring at the equipment. "Where did you get this?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What, my gear?" "Made it myself." Zale's gaze snapped to his face. "That is not possible." Ethan chuckled. "Oh, it's possible. Humans like to tinker. We take things apart, improve them, build them back better." He tapped the exogloves. "These, made from a damaged Pirellian exosuit, weigh lighter now, and they give me a solid grip boost." Zale's fingers twitched at her side, but she didn't touch anything. She stared at the items like they were forbidden artifacts, something no human should possess. "You are not allowed to modify Pirellian technology," she said slowly. "It is highly regulated. Even our own people are restricted from personal enhancements." Ethan crossed his arms. "Well, I don't follow Pirellian rules. And last I checked, humans don't need permission to be smart." Zale's jaw tightened. She couldn't argue with that. For several seconds, silence filled the room. Ethan could see the gears turning in her head. Her people believed humans were resourceful but reckless. Seeing evidence of human ingenuity firsthand was clearly unsettling for her. Finally, she took a slow breath and straightened. Her formal expression returned, though there was a trace of something else. Hesitation. She turned away. "I will not report this, for now, but be careful, human. If the wrong people see this, you will not be safe." Ethan smirked. "Appreciate the warning. But as Zale walked to her side of the room, her back turned to him, Ethan noticed something. Her hands were still shaking. She wasn't just surprised, she was afraid. And that was more interesting than anything else. Ethan leaned back in his chair, watching Zale from the corner of his eye. She had returned to her side of the room, her movements calm and controlled, but he knew better. Something about his gear had rattled her. She hadn't just been surprised, she had been afraid. Why? Tyrellians were advanced, way ahead of humans in most technology. Their empire stretched across dozens of star systems. They had faster ships, stronger weapons, and better armor. So why did a simple human-made modification shake her so much? Ethan decided to push a little. He casually picked up his modified exogloves and flexed his fingers. The gloves were made from salvaged Tyrellian armor, repurposed to enhance grip strength and absorb shock. He had designed them himself, carefully rewiring their power source so they worked on human biology. He grinned. You know, I'd think you Tyrellians would be impressed by human ingenuity. Zale didn't turn. Tinkering with technology you don't fully understand is not ingenuity. It is recklessness. Ethan chuckled. Come on. You're saying you guys don't customize your gear? No personal upgrades? Zale hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. No. Ethan frowned. That's weird. Even humans in the military make their own adjustments. Better grips, custom energy packs, that kind of thing. Zale's back stiffened. There it was again, hesitation. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Something wasn't adding up. All right, he said, leaning forward. Then tell me something. If Tyrellians don't modify their gear, why did you react like that? You looked like I just set off a bomb in the room. Zale finally turned to face him. Her silver eyes locked onto his, sharp and unreadable. For a moment, it felt like she was deciding whether to answer him or end the conversation right there. Then, she sighed. A long, slow breath. There are things you do not understand, human. Ethan smirked. I get that a lot. Zale didn't smile. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Tyrellian technology is different. It is not just metal and circuits. It is linked to us. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Linked? Like biometric locks. Zale shook her head. More than that. Our equipment is built to work only for us. It recognizes Tyrellian biology. It is designed to be part of us, in a way you humans do not practice. Ethan blinked. He had never heard that before. He glanced at his exogloves. He had reprogrammed them, sure, but it wasn't that hard. Just a few modifications, bypassing the original security restrictions. So you're saying, this gear shouldn't work for me? Zale's expression darkened. It should be impossible. Ethan grinned. Guess I'm just that good. Zale's eyes flashed. No, you are not understanding. If a human can modify and use Tyrellian equipment, it means something is very wrong. For the first time, Ethan felt a small chill run down his spine. Zale wasn't just talking about rules or laws. There was something bigger at play here. Wrong how? He asked. Zale hesitated again. She looked like she was deciding whether to tell him the truth or stay silent. Then her communicator beeped. She tapped the device on her wrist. A calm, mechanical voice spoke in Tyrellian. Officer Zale, you are requested at Command Center Gamma. Urgent matter. Zale's posture straightened. Understood. She turned to Ethan, her expression unreadable once again. I must go. Do not touch anything else. Ethan smirked. No promises. Zale shot him a glare before leaving the room, the door sliding shut behind her. The moment she was gone, Ethan let out a slow breath. Something was off. Tyrellians were too strict, too controlled to allow mistakes in their technology. If they had designed their gear to be impossible for humans to use, then his modifications shouldn't have worked. But they did. And Zale had been afraid because of it. Ethan tapped his fingers on the table, his mind racing. What was she not telling him? Then, a new thought hit him. If Zal had been shocked, how would the rest of the Turellians react? Would they see him as a threat, a problem to be eliminated? Ethan exhaled and picked up his gloves again. He had a feeling that whatever secret Zal was hiding, he was already too deep in it. And he wasn't planning on stopping now. Ethan sat alone in his room, staring at the exogloves on his desk. Zal's words kept repeating in his head. It should be impossible. Why? He had worked with Turellian tech before. It had taken time, but nothing was impossible. Yet, Zal had been genuinely shaken. Something was off. He flexed his fingers, then slid the gloves back on. The moment they activated, he felt a familiar hum, the power flowing smoothly through the modified circuits. His fingers clenched into a fist. It worked, just like before. Then why was Zal so afraid? A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. Someone was outside. Ethan stood, his muscles tensing. Zal had left barely 15 minutes ago. Was she back already? The door slid open. It wasn't Zal. A different Turellian stood there, tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing a high-ranking officer's uniform. His deep violet skin was darker than Zal's, and his sharp silver eyes studied Ethan with unsettling intensity. Behind him stood two more Turellians, both armed. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. This wasn't a friendly visit. The officer stepped inside. "Human," he said, his voice low but firm. "You will come with us." Ethan forced a grin. "Did I win a prize?" The officer didn't smile. Now, Ethan glanced at the armed guards. They weren't pointing their weapons at him. Not yet. But their posture was stiff, controlled. They were ready to act. Ethan sighed. "All right, fine." He raised his hands, showing he wasn't resisting, and walked out of the room. They led him through the station's sleek, metallic corridors. The walk was silent, and the tension was thick in the air. Finally, they arrived at a restricted section, a part of the station Ethan had never been allowed in before. The officer entered a secured room, motioning for Ethan to follow. Inside, Zal was already waiting. Her arms were crossed, and her expression was unreadable. But Ethan noticed something off. She wasn't wearing her usual confidence. She looked uneasy. The officer stepped forward. "Sit." Ethan did. "I'm guessing this isn't about my roommate agreement." The officer ignored him. He tapped a panel, and a holographic display flickered to life. Ethan's exogloves appeared on the screen, rotating slowly. "These," the officer said, "should not work for you." Ethan leaned back. "Yeah, so I've heard." The officer's silver eyes narrowed. "You do not understand the severity of this." Ethan glanced at Zal, but she remained silent. The officer continued. "Turellian technology is built with a genetic lock. It will only activate for a registered Turellian. Even attempting modifications should result in a complete system shutdown." Ethan frowned. "Then why doesn't it?" Zal finally spoke. "That is what we are trying to understand." Ethan rubbed his jaw. "Maybe your genetic lock isn't as strong as you thought." The officer's expression darkened. "It is absolute." A heavy silence filled the room. Zal looked at Ethan. "How did you modify it?" Ethan shrugged. "The usual way. Bypassed the power relay, rerouted the core circuit, disabled security protocols." Zal shook her head. "That should not be possible." Ethan leaned forward. "Well, guess what? It is." The officer exhaled sharply. He turned to Zal. "Run another scan." Zal tapped a console. The hologram changed, now showing biometric data. Ethan squinted at the readings, but he couldn't make sense of them. Zal stared at the screen, then stiffened. The officer leaned closer. His expression shifted from suspicion to something much worse, concern. Zal turned to Ethan, her voice quieter than before. "Your biology, it is not fully human." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "What?" The officer's voice was grim. "There are Turellian markers in your DNA." Ethan laughed. "That's impossible. I'm from Earth, born and raised." Zale didn't blink. And yet the evidence is clear. Ethan shook his head. This had to be a mistake. But the way they were looking at him, it wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something deeper, more dangerous. The officer's tone became sharper. We need to know where you came from, human. Ethan clenched his fists. I already told you. Zale's gaze locked onto his. Then explain how your body can interface with Tyrellian technology. Ethan had no answer. For the first time, he wasn't sure if this was just a misunderstanding, or if his entire life had been a lie. Ethan sat frozen in his seat, his mind racing. Tyrellian markers in his DNA. That was impossible. He was born on Earth. He had human parents. He had lived a completely normal life, until now. Zale and the officer continued staring at him, their expressions unreadable. The air in the room felt thicker, heavier. Ethan finally broke the silence. You're wrong. There's no way I have Tyrellian DNA. Zale didn't respond immediately. Instead, she tapped a few controls on the console, bringing up a detailed genetic scan of Ethan. Strange symbols and shifting graphs filled the holographic display. She studied them, then turned back to him. The data does not lie. Ethan's hands curled into fists. Then explain how this happened. Because I sure as hell don't remember being part alien. The officer exhaled sharply. That is what we intend to find out. Ethan shook his head. No, you don't get it. This doesn't make sense. I grew up on Earth. My parents were both human. I have medical records, school records, everything. If I had Tyrellian DNA, someone would have noticed. Zale's gaze softened slightly. Perhaps. Ethan frowned. What do you mean, perhaps? Zale exchanged a glance with the officer before responding. If the markers were dormant, human scanners might not have detected them. But something has changed. Something. Activated them. Ethan's stomach tightened. Activated. Zale nodded. It would explain why you can now interact with Tyrellian technology. Your body has recognized the connection. Ethan leaned back, his pulse pounding in his ears. This was crazy. 1 minute, he was just a guy with an engineering hobby. The next, he was being told he wasn't entirely human. What happens now? He asked. The officer crossed his arms. We will conduct further tests. Ethan's jaw tightened. And if I refuse? The officer didn't hesitate. That is not an option. Ethan scoffed. So, what? I'm a prisoner now. Zale stepped forward. No, but we need answers. And you need them too. Ethan wanted to argue, but deep down, he knew she was right. He couldn't just ignore this. Zale tapped the console again, and a holographic display shifted. A map of the station appeared, highlighting restricted sectors. We have technology that might reveal more about your genetic structure, she said, but access is complicated. Ethan frowned. Why? The officer's expression darkened. Because that level of information is only available to Tyrellians of high status. Ethan folded his arms. Great. And let me guess, I'm not on the VIP list. Zale hesitated. No, but I am. Ethan raised an eyebrow. So what's the problem? Zale glanced at the officer before speaking. I would be risking everything by giving you access. Ethan studied her face. For the first time, he realized she was afraid. Not of him, but of what might happen if she helped him. He leaned forward. Zale, if there's even a small chance that this can explain what's happening to me, don't you think it's worth the risk? Zale looked away for a moment, her jaw tightening. Then she exhaled and nodded. I will get you in, she said, but you must promise me one thing. Ethan tilted his head. What? Zale met his eyes. No matter what we find, do not let them control you. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. Them. Before he could ask what she meant, the officer's communicator beeped. He checked the screen, then stiffened. We have a problem, he muttered. Zale frowned. What is it? The officer turned toward them, his face grim. Someone else is looking for him. Ethan felt his blood run cold. Who? The officer's silver eyes locked onto his. A Tyrellian council ship just arrived. They are requesting you be turned over to them, immediately. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He had no idea who these people were, but he knew one thing for certain. They weren't here to help. Ethan's heart pounded as Zale and the officer exchanged a tense look. A Tyrellian council ship was here, and they were demanding him. But why? The officer's grip on his communicator tightened. They didn't say why they want him. Zale shook her head, her expression grim. No, but I doubt it's for a friendly chat. Ethan exhaled sharply. So what do we do? The officer turned to him. You have two options. Either surrender and go with them, or we hide you and try to figure out the truth before they get to you. Ethan's stomach twisted. And what happens if I go with them? Zell's expression darkened. Best case, they interrogate you. Worst case, she hesitated. You don't come back. Ethan's jaw tightened. Then I think we both know what I'm choosing. Zale gave a sharp nod. Then we need to move. Now. She tapped a few commands on her wrist console, and the doors to the room unlocked with a soft hiss. Follow me. The officer stepped forward. I'll try to stall them. But if you're caught, I won't be able to protect you. Ethan nodded. Understood. Zale led him through the corridors of the station, moving fast, but not suspiciously. The last thing they needed was to draw attention. Ethan glanced at her. Where exactly are we going? Zale didn't look back. There's a restricted archive, a place where high-ranking Tyrellians store genetic records, classified research, and secrets. Ethan frowned. And how does that help me? Zell's voice lowered. If your DNA has Tyrellian markers, there's a chance the records will show who you are, or who you were meant to be. Ethan didn't like the sound of that. You're saying this might have been planned. Zale hesitated. I don't know. But if someone wants you badly enough to send a council ship, then your existence is important to them. Ethan swallowed hard. He wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a very bad thing. They reached a large metal door at the end of a dimly lit corridor. Zale pulled out a small glowing device and pressed it against the scanner. The door clicked open. Hurry, she whispered. Ethan slipped inside, and Zale followed, sealing the door behind them. The room was cold, lined with strange floating data panels. A soft blue glow illuminated the walls, and Ethan could feel the humming energy of hidden machines at work. Zale quickly moved to a control station, her fingers dancing over the interface. I'm searching the archives now. It'll take a moment. Ethan exhaled, trying to calm himself. But before he could say anything, boom. A muffled explosion shook the station. Zell's eyes widened. They're here. Ethan's hands curled into fists. How much time do we have? Zell's screen flashed red. Not enough. A voice suddenly echoed over the station's intercom. Attention, unauthorized personnel. Stand down and surrender the human immediately. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. They weren't just looking for him anymore. They knew exactly where he was. Zale cursed under her breath. They've hacked the station's sensors. We're out of time. Ethan looked at the display. Did you get anything? Zale hesitated, then froze. Her eyes widened as she stared at the screen. Ethan stepped closer. Zale. She turned to him, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan, you're not just part Tyrellian. You were part of a program. Ethan's blood turned to ice. What kind of program? Zale swallowed hard. A hidden project. One that was erased from the records, except for this. She pointed at the screen, where a series of Tyrellian symbols glowed faintly. You were engineered. Ethan's breath caught. Engineered. For what? Before Zale could answer, the sound of footsteps echoed outside the door. They were out of time. Zale grabbed his wrist. We need to run. Ethan clenched his fists. He didn't have all the answers yet, but one thing was clear. Whoever these people were, they didn't want him to find out the truth. And that only made him want it more. The footsteps outside the door were growing louder. Ethan's heart pounded as Dale quickly shut down the computer, wiping any trace of their search. "Move," she whispered sharply, grabbing his wrist. Ethan followed her through a narrow passage at the back of the archive room. The dimly lit corridor was tight, barely wide enough for them to run side by side. Behind them, the heavy metal door slammed open. "Search the room," a deep, commanding voice ordered. Ethan clenched his fists. They were seconds away from being caught. Zale tapped a button on her wrist console. A hidden hatch ahead of them slid open. "Get in," she ordered. Without hesitation, Ethan crawled through. Zale followed, shutting the hatch behind them just as the sound of boots rushed into the archive room. They were safe, for now. The cramped tunnel led downward, twisting and turning through the hidden structures of the station. Ethan kept his voice low. "What do you mean I was engineered?" Zale took a deep breath, her expression unreadable. "The record said you were part of a classified project, a genetic experiment, but the details were incomplete." Ethan frowned. "Experiment for what?" Zale hesitated before answering. "To create a hybrid, a bridge between humans and Tyrellians." Ethan's mind raced. Why would they do that? Zale's eyes met his. "Because humans are different. You resist things that should break you. You adapt faster than almost any species we know. Some in the Tyrellian Council believe that combining our strengths could create something unstoppable." Ethan's breath caught. "So I'm an experiment." Zale shook her head. "No, you're more than that. You weren't just created. You were erased from the records. Someone didn't want you to exist." Ethan's jaw tightened, and now they're here to fix that mistake. Zale didn't argue. The tunnel ended at another hatch. Zale pressed her palm against it, and the door slid open, revealing a dark storage bay filled with old crates and machinery. Zale exhaled. "We can stay hidden here for a bit, but we need a plan." Ethan scanned the room. "Is there a way off the station?" Zale nodded. "There's an old service dock. I have a small ship hidden there, but getting to it won't be easy." Ethan smirked. Easy stopped being an option a long time ago. Zale chuckled despite the danger. "All right then, let's move." They made their way through the storage bay, careful not to make noise. The tension was thick. They both knew the council wouldn't give up until Ethan was captured, or worse. But Ethan wasn't about to let that happen. Elsewhere on the station, Commander Varen stood in the archive room, his cold gaze scanning the empty space. The human had vanished, but he wasn't concerned. "Seal all exits," he ordered his officers. "He won't get far." One of the officers hesitated. "Sir, why is the council so desperate to retrieve him?" Varen's expression darkened. "Because he is a threat." The officer frowned. "But he's just one human." Varen's jaw tightened. That's exactly the problem. Without another word, he turned and activated his wrist communicator. "Deploy the drones. Find him." The hunt had begun. Back at the storage bay, Zale and Ethan slipped through the shadows, moving fast but carefully. The service dock was only a few levels away, but every step felt like they were running out of time. Suddenly, a sharp beeping sound echoed through the air. Ethan and Zale froze. "Drones," Zale whispered. Ethan turned his head slightly. Small floating machines were moving down the corridor, their sensors scanning every inch of the station. "We have to disable them," Ethan said. Zale glanced around and spotted a control panel. "I can shut them down, but I'll need a minute." Ethan took a deep breath. "Do it. I'll handle the drones." Zale hesitated. "That's suicide." Ethan grinned. "Only if I fail." Zale didn't argue. She ran to the panel while Ethan grabbed a nearby metal rod, his grip tightening around it. The first drone rounded the corner, and Ethan swung hard. The metal rod slammed into the drone. sending it crashing to the ground with a shower of sparks. The second drone reacted instantly, scanning for a target. Ethan ducked behind a crate as a thin red laser shot past him. He grabbed a nearby wrench and threw it. The wrench struck the drone's sensor, causing it to spin out of control before crashing against the wall. Ethan exhaled. 2 down. Almost there, Zale called out. Ethan turned to see a third drone approaching fast. He reached for another weapon. But before he could react, Zale slammed a final command into the console. The drone froze in midair, its lights flickering before shutting down completely. Zale grinned. Got it. Ethan smirked. Took you long enough. Zale rolled her eyes. Let's go. They sprinted down the corridor, finally reaching the service dock. Zale quickly activated the ship's entrance. The small black spacecraft hummed to life. Ethan jumped in first, followed by Zale, who sealed the hatch behind them. Ethan moved to the cockpit, his hands hovering over the unfamiliar controls. I have no idea how to fly this thing. Zale smirked. Good thing I do. The engines roared to life, and the ship lifted off the platform just as the doors burst open. Turellian soldiers rushed in, weapons aimed. But it was too late. With a final burst of speed, the ship shot out of the docking bay and into the darkness of space. Ethan exhaled, sinking into his seat. We made it. Zale didn't look as relieved. She stared at the flashing warning on her screen. They'd locked onto us, she said grimly. We're not out of this yet. Ethan tightened his seatbelt. Then let's give them a reason to regret chasing us. Zale grinned. Now you're talking. She punched the thrusters, and the ship blazed into the void, with the enemy right behind them. The ship shook violently as enemy fire rained down from behind. The Turellian pursuit vessels were fast, and they were closing in. Ethan gripped the armrest of his seat. Zale, tell me you have a plan. Zale's fingers flew across the controls, her expression calm but focused. I always have a plan. Ethan glanced at the radar. Yeah. Does your plan involve getting shot down? Zale smirked. Only if you don't trust me. The ship's engines roared as she jerked the controls, sending them into a sharp barrel roll. The sudden maneuver caused the enemy's lasers to miss, narrowly skimming past their hull. Ethan's stomach lurched. Warn me before you do that next time. Zale ignored him, her attention locked onto the navigation screen. There's an asteroid field ahead. If we make it inside, we can lose them. Ethan's eyes widened. You want to fly through a death trap? Zale grinned. Exactly. The enemy ships weren't slowing down. If they hesitated for even a second, they'd be blown to pieces. Zale punched the thrusters, and the ship surged forward, heading straight into the thick cluster of floating rocks. The enemy ships followed, their lasers blazing through the dark. Ethan watched as massive asteroids spun wildly, some colliding and shattering into debris. One wrong move, and they'd be space dust. Zale weaved through the chaos, dodging every rock with unbelievable precision. The enemy ships weren't as lucky. One smashed into an asteroid, exploding into a brilliant fireball. Ethan whooped. That's one down. Zale didn't look away from the controls. 2 more to go. The remaining ships were still on their tail, their lasers flashing through the asteroid field. Ethan's heart pounded as he saw one of the shots heading right for them. Hold on. Zale pulled the ship into a spin, narrowly avoiding the blast. The laser struck a large asteroid ahead of them, causing it to break apart. The debris rained down, forcing the enemy ships to swerve wildly. One of the Turellian ships clipped a rock, sending it into an uncontrollable spiral before crashing into another asteroid. Ethan pumped his fist. And that's 2. Only one enemy ship remained. Zale's eyes narrowed. They're not giving up. Ethan scanned the controls. We need something to shake them off. Zale's fingers moved fast. I have one last trick. Ethan raised an eyebrow. You're only telling me now. Zale smirked. You never asked. She pressed a button, and suddenly, The ship lurched forward, releasing a massive burst of energy. The pulse sent a shockwave through the asteroid field, throwing rocks and debris in every direction. The enemy ship had no time to react. A giant asteroid smashed into it, reducing it to scrap metal. Ethan let out a deep breath. We did it. Zale exhaled, her grip on the controls loosening. For now, a moment of truth. The ship finally emerged from the asteroid field, leaving the chaos behind. For the first time in hours, there was silence. Ethan turned to Zale. So, what now? Zale hesitated before answering. You can't go back to your old life, Ethan. The Council will never stop looking for you. Ethan sighed. Yeah, I figured. He glanced out the window at the endless stretch of stars. So where do we go? Zale tapped on the console, pulling up a holographic map. There's a hidden colony deep in the outer rim. A place where people like us, people the Council wants to erase, can live freely. Ethan studied her face. And you've been planning to go there? Zale nodded. For a long time. Ethan smiled. Then I guess I'm coming with you. Zale smirked. I was hoping you'd say that. She punched in the coordinates, and the ship's engines hummed to life. As they flew toward the unknown, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. For the first time, he wasn't running. He was finally choosing his own path. And this was just the beginning.